On September 26, 2024, the game developers Wrong Organ released their second ever title, Mouthwashing, a narrative psychological horror game that follows the 5-person Topar crew on their freighter spaceship after a devastating crash has left them stranded with dwindling resources and a severely injured captain. The game is intense, exploring themes regarding alcoholism, depression, sexual assault, and overarchingly, moral responsibility, all through the careful labyrinth of nuanced storytelling and carefully designed gameplay. Interestingly, the game has also been described as a walking simulator, a game genre that, as its title suggests, utilizes walking as its primary mechanic and typically doesn't function with traditional win-lose conditions. And the description is quite fitting for Mouthwashing. Much of its gameplay is pretty limited, only really utilizing the WASD keys for movement, left click for environment interaction and dialogue, and a type of gameplay James Newman would describe as offline engagement. In this video, we will be dissecting Mouthwashing's gameplay as well as its levels of interactivity, using Newman's framework of ergodic gameplay and how it elevates the game's themes, core message, and player experience. Now, firstly, I'm going to give a very brief overview of Mouthwashing's storyline before we analyze its specific gameplay to make my argument easier to understand for those who haven't played it. But remember, much of the game's story is told in disjointed, distorted, and sometimes confusing scenes, and this summary is only a cursory explanation to preface my analysis. I highly recommend playing the game yourself, or at least watching a playthrough to experience Mouthwashing in its rich entirety. And if you're already aware of its plot and don't need a summary, you can skip to this time. But without further ado, 5 crew members are stranded in space after a mysterious crash aboard their ship. The team includes Curly, the captain, Jimmy, the co-pilot, Anya, the nurse, Swansea, the mechanic, and Daisuke, Swansea's intern. The game unfolds through alternating perspectives and timelines between Curly and Jimmy, creating a disjointed yet compelling narrative that invites players to piece together the full story. Through one of the first scenes, we learn that as a result of the crash, Curly is severely injured and left disabled, blamed for the incident, and is barely kept alive by Anya and a dwindling supply of painkillers. When the crew eventually runs out of food and essential supplies, they discover that the cargo they were transporting consists entirely of mouthwash. In desperation, and with the notice that contains 14% ethanol, the crew begins drinking it and getting drunk. Tensions rise in the ship as hopes of survival diminish, and Anya eventually isolates herself in the medical bay for seemingly unknowable reasons. Jimmy, growing more unstable, tries to convince Swansea to help him break into said medical bay. When Swansea refuses, Jimmy drugs him using rubbing alcohol and manipulates Daisuke into crawling through a damaged vent to access the medbay and reach Anya. Daisuke is severely injured in the process, and Jimmy makes things worse by attempting to disinfect his wounds with mouthwash as the last of the rubbing alcohol was used to subdue Swansea. As Daisuke's condition deteriorates, Swansea offers him gentle final words before reluctantly killing him to end his suffering. Following this tragedy, the tension between Swansea and Jimmy crescendo as Swansea's grief and rage turn to Jimmy. A flashback reveals that, earlier in the journey prior to the crash, Curly had informed the crew that they were being laid off and that this would be their final mission together. Later, in a private conversation, Anya confides in Curly that she is pregnant with Jimmy's child, with other narrative scenes that heavily imply that Jimmy sexually assaulted her. Once finding out, Curly tries to keep the peace with Jimmy as they have been longtime close friends, but before he can act, Anya reveals to Jimmy what she has exposed. Fearing accountability and unwilling to face the consequences of his actions, Jimmy crashes the ship in a failed murder-suicide attempt that leads Curly to his maimed state. Back into the present, Jimmy breaks into the medical bay only to find that Anya has taken her own life via overdose. In the aftermath, he uses the ship's only gun to kill Swansea, who, in a powerful monologue about his past of alcoholism, calls Jimmy selfish and cowardly. Jimmy is then tormented by visions that reflect his guilt and inability to accept responsibility. Eventually, he places Curly into the ship's only chiropod, which Swansea had intended for Daisuke. Jimmy tells Curly he's proud to have been his co-pilot and friend before using the same gun that killed Swansea to end his own life, dying under the illusion that he was the hero of the story. Curly, watching from the chiropod, is forced to survive in stasis for the next 20 years to maybe be rescued. Now that we've set our foundation, let's dissect the first few minutes of gameplay more closely. Pony Express long-haul space freighter Tulpar. Crew 5. Planned shipment duration 382 days. Elapsed transit time 147 days. I hope this hurts. After loading into the title screen and reading the cryptic words, "I hope this hurts," the player in first-person perspective is immediately thrust into the story as the ship's console prompts imminent crash. With bright flashing warnings, the player has only one possible option of gameplay, which is finding the captain's only key to unlock the ship's manual override and pressing the button to crash the ship. The player with nowhere else to go is then forced to run back and forth through the ship as it shifts and contorts, becoming more and more surreal. The distorted environment not only reflects the character's game psyche, but it also begins to influence the player. It's confusing and jarring, and although this entire sequence only lasts for 5 minutes and 16 seconds, it's incredibly representative of the game and its mechanics as a whole. Firstly, much of Mouthwashing's most pivotal gameplay is surprisingly its lack of gameplay. Not in the sense that the game is passively experienced, but in the sense that much of the play is limited. During that intro sequence, the player's only option is to crash the ship. Sure, there is the added search for the key and the couple left-click mouse interactions, but they all come secondary to the overall lack of alternative gameplay. There are no secret buttons, no boss battles, no puzzles, no choice but to commit to the action the game prompts. This lack of player control within the game state is extremely representative of James Newman's online and offline player interaction framework. In his research post, The Myth of Ergodic Video Games, he roughly defines 2 terms for video game engagement between the player and the game. Online being the state of ergodic participation that we would, in a common sense manner, think of as playing the game. For example, in a game like Mario, it would be the actual level clearing that requires jumping over Goombas, going through pipes, collecting coins, while offline refers to periods where no registered input control is received from the player. These would be the transition animations after Mario clears a level, or the cutscenes of Peach being saved from Bowser. Oftentimes, offline gameplay, because of its lack of interactivity and non-ergodicity, creates a disconnect between the player and the character they control. Now, what is important to understand is that Newman strictly states that these 2 conditions are not binary and don't need to be as blunt as a cutscene straight to a play sequence like in Mario. The example he provides is within the racing game Wipeout, in which while the player is at the starting grid waiting for a green light, they're able to rev their engine. And if done correctly, they're rewarded with an extra starting boost. The player in this circumstance has no real control over the game state. Their revving will not make the green light come any faster, but they're still interacting with the game in a relevant manner. It may seem insignificant, but it manages to blur the line between online and offline engagement for the player really effectively. And you may be asking, Debbie, why is this important? Because it creates a sense of cohesion within the gameplay that elevates the player experience to more than just passivity or distant watching during these moments of offline interaction. It is not a film. The player is still actively participating in the scene, no matter how limited their controls are. Mouthwashing pushes this blend in engagement to its furthest potential in a way that makes you, the player, complicit. Their gameplay doesn't affect the story at all, and yet you are forced to keep playing if you want more information, becoming complicit in the unfolding narrative. The player is rewarded by following objectives with more story. The game also weaves in both of these methods of engagement from multiple ends of the spectrum, from full map exploration, puzzle completion, and play segments to complete hands-off animated cutscenes. Following that introductory scene, we immediately jump to 2 months after the crash, where we meet Swansea, the disgruntled and jaded mechanic, Anya, the timid nurse, and Daisuke, the young, cheery intern. This is also where we find out whose perspective we're playing from: Jimmy, the ship's substitute captain and co-pilot following the crash. As we complete the newly established objective to find the original captain's code scanner, we're also able to fully explore the ship and converse with the rest of the crew, an example of more online engagement within the gameplay. The dialogue suggests a growing hopelessness and desperation within the ship for survival, and the environment is notably bleak with a perpetual sunset and intrusive white repair foam surrounding every inch of the ship. As you explore more, the player reaches the medical room, where you interact with Anya. He doesn't want to keep still anymore. It just hurts him so much. I can't stand the noise. Oh, also, well, I was hoping you could help me with Captain... Right, sorry, with Curly's medication? Yeah, forget I asked. You are also then introduced to the ship's official captain, Curly, and are forced to witness this scene. I can't bear to listen. I- Excuse me, sorry. I say force because, again, the player has no other gameplay option other than to follow the limited objectives provided. And this cutscene, unlike the introduction, is fully offline. No interactables, no controls, nothing as the screen turns black and you have to experience Curly's pain to its fullest. And there are very few scenes that utilize this end of complete offline gameplay, but they carry so much intensity and impact because of that. Unlike other games where cutscenes hold a distance between the player and the game, think again to the Mario example. We do not feel like we're involved in the cutscene of Princess Peach getting saved, we feel like we were distantly watching. Mouthwashing's offline scenes make the player feel helpless. You go through constant interaction through walking and clicking through dialogue to sudden paralysis. And it's extremely intentional to both this scene and the game's entire story, where both Anya and Curly are ultimately helpless to Jimmy's exploitations. It gives the player the opportunity to experience their powerlessness alongside them, while also forcing the player to commit to the game, to the story, and ultimately to Jimmy's actions. After you get through this scene, we transition back to the online-offline blend, eventually opening the cargo room using the previously obtained code scanner, and we are suddenly brought to 7 days before the crash. This time, the player is in Curly's perspective, talking to Anya during a mandatory mental health evaluation in which the dialogue takes a turn to discuss Jimmy. As I've talked about before, this disjointed back and forth between perspectives, times, environments, and circumstances is the vehicle in which Mouthwashing reveals its narrative. Much of the story is revealed slowly and oftentimes extremely subtly. And for a game heavily reliant on its story, it sure does make the player do a lot of work for more of it. And I do not mean work in a physical or gameplay sense, I mean work as in the player needs to actively search for subtext, make their own conclusions, and connect the small distorted parts of each plotline together by themselves. And although Mouthwashing has no conventional winning or losing conditions, I actually think there is a sort of win state that the developers have created for the player. You win Mouthwashing if you can successfully understand the game's message. So what is Mouthwashing's main message, and why did it need to be portrayed as a game? The general consensus within the fandom is that the game is trying to tell players to take responsibility. It's a reoccurring objective from both Jimmy and Curly's perspectives, and the message repeats quite often. Do what they both continuously fail to do and take real accountability for your mistakes. But what does this mean? I feel like this conclusion is quite broad and unconvincing, and I propose that it is only one part of the story Wrong Organ is trying to tell. On the developer's Steam page, Mouthwashing Q&A Part 1, one of the questions answered is, if you could have the audience take away one thing from this game, what would it be? And the developers answer with these 3 words: don't drink mouthwash. And within a post littered with gags and silly jokes, like a detailed answer as to each character's favorite Pokemon, and this drawing, it's very easy to discount this answer as just another simple quip about the game's name and a very real health warning to their fans. But I think this answer goes a lot deeper into the game's core message directed towards the player, especially alongside 2 of its most iconic scenes, the Dead Pixel and Swansea's monologue. Both of these scenes are arguably the most important for the player and the game, while simultaneously having the least amount of player interaction in the whole story. In the Dead Pixel scene, the player is in Curly's perspective, talking to Anya as the giant screen in their common area radiates a calm night sky 2 days before the crash. Neither of the 2 able to fall asleep. I actually kind of like the nighttime window screen, if you can believe it, so I just come look at it sometimes. If you look really close, you can see that there's a dead pixel in the upper right corner. In the back of my mind, it's always there. Curly's flaw within the game and the reason for his helplessness against Jimmy is that he is only able to look at the bigger picture. He's unable to see the dead pixel, Jimmy and his assault on Anya, even when Anya is so clearly pleading for help. Her reluctance to give Jimmy his personal mental health evaluation, the constant belittlement she experiences through Jimmy's dialogue, her inability to sleep while also asking, "Hey, why do you think Pony Express puts a lock on the medical room door but not in the sleeping quarters?" The developers said don't drink mouthwash. Curly is the mouthwash, able to disinfect 99.99% of germs, powerless against that 0.01. And this is the scene that I think presents the player the win state. Are you also Curly? Through the confusing mess of timelines, surreal moments, differing perspectives, are you as the player able to understand what Anya is saying, able to decipher that Jimmy raped her? Because if you're not just complicit because you're playing the game, you're complicit because you're unable to see how this game reflects real-life sexual assault. Swansea's monologue approaches this idea of complicity a little differently. It takes place almost directly after Daisuke's death. Before the monologue begins, you play a minigame as Jimmy that is representative of the physical fight going on in the ship. Swansea with the axe that he was forced to kill Daisuke with, Jimmy with the gun he stole from the captain's quarters, both of them trying their best to take responsibility. Within the minigame, you play as Jimmy in a warped, maze-like graveyard haunted with pictures of dead Daisuke and running and hiding from an angry Swansea while simultaneously trying to shoot him. It's one of the most online moments of interaction throughout the entire game. You're running, avoiding hits, peeking corners, aiming a gun, and trying to shoot a target. It's an intense and fast-paced sequence, especially in comparison to the rest of the game's pacing. And it adds to the connected parallels between the players and Jimmy's emotional state. We are just as panicky and frightened as Jimmy, but also just as sure of the objective. When the player finally hits 3 successful shots on Swansea, they are brought to the exact opposite spectrum of interactivity. A long, unskippable, and unplayable monologue before Swansea's death. And just like Jimmy, we're forced to listen. I have something to say. So shut the fuck up and listen. I spent 13 years half cut up to my eyeballs. Drunk, to put it mildly. And suddenly I saw it. The streetlight shining in my face. 500 gigawatts of the power of God. A vision of my bloated body found in some ditch. It scared me straight. So I got a collar shirt, mortgage, and a credit card. All the things that make a good man. I hoped that I could raise my children to be better than their old man. I wanted to believe I was never one setback away from my worst self. But the truth is, discipline, drive, routine, the endless fucking desperation to get shit done, a loving wife, great kids, sobriety. I'm telling you, accomplishments I've been chasing all my life, never felt as good as I expected when I crossed the finish line. So now that we're at the end, take an inventory. Those nights spinning out of my head, sinking into the sofa. Broken glass in my palms, bleeding dry, the funniest thing ever. Old dogs laughing and snarling on the waterbed floor and mocking the moon for daring to show its face. All nausea and wreckage and vomit and ugly cruelty. The only problem in the world, an empty bottle. Those were the best days of my life. Yeah. Those were the best days of my life. I got nothing to hide. Ready to face the music. I can see myself for what I am. But you? A cowardly, selfish motherfucker, and you can't even see it. I should have been able to protect the kid. If I could have done one thing right, I wish it had been to give him one small chance off this goddamn rock. Fuck you. In Toby Smathera's paper about portrayal of trauma within the game medium, he states, through the combination of these 3 affordances, interactivity, empathy, and complicity, games are well equipped to draw the player in, to make them feel for characters who may be traumatized, and to make them feel responsible for the traumatic events portrayed within. By having the player interact with traumatized characters, by allowing them to virtually experience traumatizing situations, and by having them play through sequences in which they could potentially be viewed as the perpetrator of the trauma. Mouthwashing, through its interactivity and immersion, forced the player to become the perpetrator, to become more than just complicit. When you shoot Swansea, you as a player are making the deliberate choice to continue the game, to continue as Jimmy, to be responsible for playing the game. During the monologue when Swansea talks about the best days of his life being the ones where he was drunk, unconscious, in an ugly wreckage, the struggle of doing well and how it was never as satisfying as being drunk, he is talking to Jimmy, but he is also talking directly to the player, to you. He acknowledges that responsibility doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it's not supposed to. There are a lot of things in life where the best course of action is actively choosing the path that makes you feel the worst. For Swansea, that was giving up alcohol, picking up the Pony Express collared shirt, and doing his best to be a better man through discipline. This is what Jimmy fails to understand to the very end, and that is what the player needs to recognize. We witness Jimmy actively take the easiest and most self-serving path, constantly deluding himself that what he's doing is justified. At no point does he ever acknowledge his capacity for harm, his evil crime against Anya, his growing spite and jealousy for Curly. He's always blaming others or repeating the delusion of, I can fix this, I'll take care of it, I'm taking responsibility. Unlike Swansea, he cannot see himself for who he is, and in the end, never takes responsibility for anything. Swansea drinks mouthwash, and he acknowledges it. When he says "but you," he is directly challenging the player to recognize these harmful behaviors in Jimmy, and even possibly in yourself. Are you taking responsibility? The developers said don't drink mouthwash. Will you, understanding that doing good may never be as satisfying as the alternative, still avoid the mouthwash? And if not, will you be able to take true accountability for it? One of the first messages the game presents is, I hope this hurts. And similar to take responsibility, it's a recurring message throughout the game. There is no implication of who says it, of who it's said to. When asked directly, Kasurinen, one of the developers of the game, called it the instigating concept. And she states, at the risk of sounding pretentious, the medium is the message. I hope certain people in the gaming industry play this game. I hope they see themselves. And I hope it hurts. I hope it hurts. And if the player has successfully won, has successfully recognized their complicity within the game, recognized its roots in reality and its message to do better, to not drink the mouthwash, they should be hurt. Mouthwashing needed to be a game because it is the only medium that, through its layered and nuanced interaction systems, immersive and involved storytelling, and direct player involvement and complicity, could hurt you like this. Thank you for watching. Don't drink mouthwash.